No one expected the live broadcast to become the moment that shattered years of carefully guarded emotions. As thousands watched, Jimin stepped into the spotlight carrying a calm expression that hid a heart trembling beneath the surface, while Jungkook sat only a few feet away, completely unaware that the next few seconds would change everything he believed about their past. The confession was never supposed to happen, and the truth behind it had been buried through sacrifice, guilt, and painful silence. But when Jimin finally chose honesty over fear, one question remained. Was this heartfelt revelation about to save their bond forever, or destroy it in front of the entire world? Jimin had always been the one who carried his emotions with quiet grace, offering warm smiles that seemed effortless even on the days when exhaustion settled deep inside his heart. To everyone around him, he appeared steady, dependable, and endlessly supportive, the kind of person who instinctively placed the happiness of others before his own. Jungkook had known that side of him better than anyone. Through countless demanding schedules, late-night rehearsals, and silent moments shared away from bright lights, they had built a connection rooted in trust that seemed impossible to break. Their friendship had become a source of comfort not only for themselves but also for Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, and Taehyung, who often found reassurance simply by watching the two understand each other without needing words. It was a bond strengthened by years of shared dreams, quiet sacrifices, and unwavering loyalty, yet beneath that seemingly unshakable foundation, a truth had begun to grow in silence. Jimin had started carrying a burden he refused to place on anyone else's shoulders, convincing himself that protecting Jungkook from unnecessary pain was more important than revealing what was slowly consuming him. At first, the change was almost impossible to notice. His laughter lasted a little less, his thoughtful gaze lingered a little longer, and moments of joyful celebration were often followed by brief flashes of sadness that disappeared before anyone could question them. Jungkook sensed those subtle shifts long before anyone else did, but every attempt to understand them was gently met with reassuring smiles that concealed far more than they revealed. Believing in the trust they had always shared, Jungkook accepted those reassurances, unaware that every unanswered question quietly widened the distance growing between their hearts. As the days passed, that invisible gap became harder to ignore, creating an uneasy feeling that neither of them knew how to confront, while somewhere beyond their awareness, a single decision was already setting both of them on a path toward a moment that would test everything they had ever believed about loyalty, sacrifice, and the strength of the bond they thought could never be broken. The closer they came to the upcoming live podcast event, the more the atmosphere around them seemed to change in ways that no one could fully explain. Preparations filled every hour with rehearsals, production meetings, camera tests, and endless adjustments, leaving little room for honest reflection. From the outside, everything appeared perfectly organized, yet beneath the polished routine an invisible weight followed Jimin wherever he went. He found himself lingering in empty rehearsal rooms after everyone else had left, staring at the silent stage as though searching for the courage he had misplaced. The bright studio lights that once energized him now felt unusually cold, reminding him that the truth he had hidden for so long could not remain buried forever. Jungkook noticed these quiet disappearances more often than anyone realized. He caught fleeting expressions on Jimin's face that vanished the instant their eyes met, expressions filled with regret, hesitation, and a sadness too deep to describe. Every instinct urged him to step closer, yet something always interrupted the moment, whether another schedule, another staff request, or another reassuring smile from Jimin that silently insisted everything was fine. Sensed the growing tension as well, watching the once effortless rhythm between the two become increasingly fragile. Jin tried to restore warmth through laughter during meals, while Sugar quietly observed every interaction without drawing attention to his concerns. J-Hope filled practice sessions with encouragement, hoping positivity would dissolve whatever invisible wall had formed, and Taehyung, whose intuition rarely failed him, could no longer ignore the feeling that both Jimin and Jungkook were protecting each other from a truth neither was prepared to face. What none of them understood was that Jimin had already made a decision in complete silence. Hidden away from every rehearsal schedule and every smiling photograph was a handwritten confession he had revised countless times, each version revealing more of the guilt that had haunted him for months. He believed that keeping his feelings hidden had been an act of love, yet every passing day convinced him that silence had only caused deeper wounds. The live broadcast was no longer just another appearance before thousands of viewers. It had become the place where every secret, every sacrifice, and every painful misunderstanding would finally collide, even if the consequences shattered the life they had spent years building together. As the day of the broadcast finally arrived, an uneasy calm settled over everyone involved, the kind of silence that often appears just before an emotional storm. The studio buzzed with technicians checking microphones, producers counting down rehearsal times, and cameras gliding smoothly across the stage, yet Jimin seemed detached from the movement around him. Every familiar sound faded beneath the relentless rhythm of his own heartbeat. He had rehearsed countless performances throughout his life, but nothing had ever demanded as much courage as what he was about to do. Hidden beneath his composed appearance was the certainty that once the truth was spoken aloud, there would be no way to reclaim it. Jungkook, meanwhile, interpreted Jimin's unusual composure as emotional exhaustion. The distance that had quietly grown between them over the past several weeks had left him questioning every recent memory, wondering whether he had unknowingly caused pain he could no longer identify. Regret settled heavily in his thoughts as he replayed missed opportunities to ask deeper questions, moments when he had accepted reassuring smiles instead of searching for the truth behind them. The uncertainty became almost unbearable, yet he still believed there would be another chance after the broadcast to sit beside Jimin in private and restore the honesty that had always defined their bond. Unknown to him, that opportunity was already slipping away. Backstage, Taehyung caught a brief glimpse of a folded sheet of paper partially hidden inside Jimin's jacket before it disappeared just as quickly. He said nothing, but the expression on Jimin's face lingered in his mind long after they walked in separate directions. It was not fear alone that he saw. It was the look of someone preparing to carry the full weight of every consequence without asking anyone else to share the burden. RM noticed Taehyung's concern, while Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope exchanged quiet glances that reflected the same growing unease. No one knew exactly what was about to unfold, yet every instinct warned them that the live broadcast would become far more than another public appearance. Beyond the glowing studio lights and the anticipation of thousands of waiting viewers, an irreversible moment was drawing closer, one capable of exposing hidden wounds, redefining years of trust, and forcing two hearts that had spent so long protecting one another to confront a truth neither of them could escape. The countdown echoed through the studio with mechanical precision, each passing second tightening the invisible tension that had followed Jimin since the moment he stepped through the doors. The opening music filled the room, applause rose from the audience, and countless viewers joined the live stream within moments, unaware that they were about to witness something no producer had planned. Jimin greeted the cameras with the same gentle composure that had always comforted those around him, but beneath that familiar smile his resolve was being tested by every heartbeat. Jungkook sat nearby, offering occasional glances that carried quiet concern rather than confidence. He could no longer ignore the feeling that Jimin was preparing himself for something far beyond an ordinary conversation. As the program unfolded, memories surfaced in Jungkook's mind without warning. The countless nights they had encouraged one another through failure, the victories they had celebrated side by side, and the silent promises they had never needed to speak aloud. Those memories only deepened the confusion he now felt, because nothing in their shared history explained the sadness that had gradually settled into Jimin's eyes. Across the studio, RM maintained a calm expression while carefully observing every subtle change in body language. Jin's reassuring smile slowly faded, Sugar remained unusually still, J-Hope's optimism gave way to quiet concern, and Taehyung watched Jimin with unwavering attention, sensing that the folded paper hidden inside his jacket had become heavier than anyone could imagine. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of following the planned direction of the broadcast, Jimin's focus drifted away from the prepared questions and toward Jungkook. His expression softened, not with uncertainty but with the quiet determination of someone who had finally accepted that the cost of silence had become greater than the cost of the truth. The atmosphere shifted so suddenly that even the audience seemed to sense it. Conversations in the studio faded, the production team exchanged anxious looks behind the cameras, and an unsettling silence spread across the room. Without anyone realizing it, the carefully scripted event had already begun transforming into the moment that would expose years of hidden guilt, unanswered questions, and a confession powerful enough to leave not only Jungkook, but everyone watching around the world, completely unprepared for what would come next. Jimin slowly reached inside his jacket and rested his hand on the folded page that had accompanied him through countless sleepless nights, yet he did not unfold it immediately. For a brief moment, he simply closed his eyes, as though gathering every fragment of courage left within him before allowing the weight of the past to surface. The cameras captured every subtle movement, magnifying the silence until it became almost unbearable. Millions of viewers stared at their screens, sensing that this was no ordinary pause but the beginning of something deeply personal. Jungkook's expression changed from quiet curiosity to genuine concern as he noticed the slight tremble in Jimin's breathing. It was the first time he had ever seen someone who had always appeared emotionally resilient look as though he was standing at the edge of a decision capable of changing everything. Around them, the studio staff hesitated, unsure whether to continue according to schedule or allow the unexpected moment to unfold naturally. RM instinctively understood that interrupting now would only make whatever was coming even more painful. Jin lowered his gaze, Sugar folded his hands in thoughtful silence, J-Hope's hopeful smile disappeared completely, and Taehyung felt an overwhelming certainty that the secret Jimin had carried for so long was finally reaching its inevitable end. The room seemed to grow smaller as every heartbeat echoed louder than the applause that had welcomed them only minutes earlier. Jimin finally unfolded the page, but instead of reading from it immediately, he looked toward Jungkook with a mixture of gratitude, sorrow, and quiet affection that words alone could never fully explain. In that single glance lay years of shared memories, invisible sacrifices, misunderstood choices, and emotions carefully hidden beneath unwavering loyalty. Jungkook felt his own chest tighten as an unsettling realization settled over him. Whatever Jimin was about to reveal was not meant to seek sympathy or forgiveness. It carried the unmistakable weight of someone prepared to accept every consequence alone. And as the first words of that long-awaited confession were finally about to leave Jimin's lips, an unexpected movement from the edge of the stage threatened to change the course of everything before the truth could even be fully revealed. Before the confession could continue, a producer hurried toward the stage with an urgent message that had arrived only moments earlier, creating a brief interruption that no one in the audience understood. The unexpected pause lasted only seconds, but for Jimin it felt like an eternity. He looked down at the folded page once more, as though fate itself were offering him one final chance to remain silent. His fingers tightened around the paper, and for an instant the temptation to protect everyone by saying nothing returned stronger than ever. Yet when he lifted his eyes again, they found Jungkook's. There was no frustration in Jungkook's expression, only sincere concern and a quiet willingness to listen, the same unwavering trust that had carried them through countless difficult chapters of their lives. That single look dissolved the fear Jimin had been holding onto for months. He realized that the greatest mistake had never been the truth itself, but believing that love and loyalty required endless silence. Around them, RM noticed the subtle shift in Jimin's posture, as if an invisible burden had finally begun to lift. Jin exhaled slowly without realizing he had been holding his breath. Sugar's usually unreadable expression softened with cautious hope. J-Hope silently wished that whatever happened next would bring healing instead of more pain, and Taehyung felt an overwhelming certainty that this moment would become one none of them would ever forget. The interruption ended, the cameras returned to Jimin, and the studio fell into complete stillness once again. There was no applause, no background noise, no distractions, only the fragile silence shared between two people whose lives had become intertwined through years of unwavering devotion and unspoken sacrifice. Jimin lowered the page to his side, choosing not to hide behind carefully written words anymore. Whatever he was about to reveal would come directly from his heart, without rehearsed sentences or prepared explanations. In that instant, everyone watching understood that they were no longer witnessing a scheduled live broadcast. They were witnessing the beginning of a truth powerful enough to rewrite the meaning of trust, friendship, and love, while Jungkook, completely unaware of how deeply that truth would change his own heart, waited for the confession that was finally impossible to hold back any longer. Jimin drew a slow, steady breath, allowing the silence to settle before the weight of his emotions could overwhelm him. The confidence people had admired for years no longer came from carefully maintaining a perfect image, but from accepting that vulnerability was the only path left. His eyes remained fixed on Jungkook, not searching for approval or reassurance, but quietly acknowledging the countless memories that had shaped the bond they shared. Every success they had celebrated together, every disappointment they had endured, every sacrifice made without recognition seemed to gather within that single moment. The atmosphere inside the studio became almost impossibly still, as if time itself had chosen to pause rather than interrupt what was unfolding. Viewers across the world sensed the sincerity in Jimin's expression long before they understood its meaning, and messages began flooding the live broadcast with concern, curiosity, and hope. RM recognized that this was no longer about public appearances or carefully managed expectations. Jin felt the emotional gravity pressing against everyone in the room. Sugar quietly reflected on how often people carried unbearable burdens behind reassuring smiles. J-Hope wished with all his heart that honesty would heal wounds instead of reopening them, and Taehyung watched with unwavering attention, realizing that the confession was not simply about hidden feelings but about years of silent decisions made out of love and protection. Jimin finally allowed the truth to rise from the depths of his heart, revealing that every step he had taken to distance himself had never been born from disappointment, resentment, or fading trust. It had come from a painful belief that carrying the burden alone would spare Jungkook from guilt, pressure, and emotional pain. What he had considered an act of sacrifice had instead become the very reason misunderstanding had taken root between them, slowly replacing certainty with doubt. As those emotions filled the room, Jungkook's composure began to falter. The fragments of confusion that had haunted him for months suddenly started fitting together in ways he had never imagined, and an even more painful realization began forming in his heart. If Jimin had hidden so much to protect him, then perhaps he too had unknowingly allowed silence to become a barrier instead of reaching far enough to uncover the truth. That realization settled over him with crushing weight, and before either of them could fully process what it meant, another unexpected revelation emerged from Jimin's heart, one that would force everyone present to reconsider everything they believed had happened between them. With the first layer of truth finally exposed, Jimin no longer seemed like someone struggling to find the right words. Instead, he carried the quiet calm of a person who had accepted that honesty would hurt before it could heal. The burden he had protected for so long had not been a single mistake or one painful misunderstanding, but a chain of choices that began with the sincere belief that shielding Jungkook from emotional pain was the greatest act of loyalty he could offer. Each time he had stepped back, smiled through his own loneliness, or quietly accepted being misunderstood, he believed he was preserving Jungkook's happiness, never realizing that his silence was creating a different kind of heartbreak. Those hidden sacrifices slowly transformed into unanswered questions, and those questions eventually became emotional distance neither of them knew how to bridge. Jungkook felt every memory replay with painful clarity. Moments that had once seemed insignificant suddenly carried entirely different meanings. The missed phone calls, the brief smiles that ended too quickly, the rehearsals where Jimin appeared physically present but emotionally elsewhere, and the countless times he had insisted that everything was fine now returned with devastating force. Guilt settled heavily inside him, not because he believed Jimin had deceived him, but because he realized how easily he had accepted those comforting reassurances instead of fighting harder to understand the pain hidden beneath them. Around them, the entire studio remained frozen in respectful silence. RM lowered his head, reflecting on how even the strongest relationships could be tested by the fear of becoming a burden to someone else. Jin's eyes glistened as he quietly recognized the cost of carrying emotions alone. Sugar understood that the deepest wounds were often invisible until they reached a breaking point, while J-Hope silently hoped that this painful honesty would become the beginning of healing rather than another irreversible loss. Taehyung's attention never left the two of them, sensing that the confession was still incomplete. Jimin's expression revealed that one final truth remained locked inside his heart, a truth far heavier than anything he had already shared. It was the reason he had chosen this public stage instead of a private conversation, the reason he had accepted the risk of exposing his vulnerability before millions of viewers. As the room held its collective breath once again, it became clear that the greatest revelation had not yet been spoken, and when it finally emerged, it would forever change not only how Jungkook saw Jimin, but how they both understood the meaning of unconditional devotion. Jimin stood in complete stillness, yet the quiet strength in his expression revealed that there was no turning back. Everything he had shared until that moment had only prepared the way for the truth he had feared the most. It was not simply a confession of hidden emotions or silent sacrifices. It was an admission that every painful decision had been made after discovering something that he believed would permanently change Jungkook's future if it were ever revealed at the wrong time. Rather than allowing that burden to fall on the person he cared about most, Jimin had chosen to carry it alone, convincing himself that distance, misunderstanding, and even being judged unfairly were easier to endure than watching Jungkook lose the light that had always driven him forward. That decision had slowly isolated him from everyone who wanted to stand beside him, until loneliness became a companion he no longer questioned. As the magnitude of that realization settled over the room, Jungkook felt as though every unanswered question from past had suddenly gained a painful new meaning. He remembered the moments when Jimin quietly stepped aside to let others receive recognition, the times he disappeared after long rehearsals without explanation, and the occasions when his reassuring smile seemed almost too carefully practiced to be genuine. None of those moments had been random. They had all been pieces of a larger sacrifice that Jimin had believed no one should ever discover. RM, Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, and Taehyung each reflected on memories they had overlooked, recognizing that the signs had always been there, hidden behind compassion so selfless that it never asked to be understood. The studio remained wrapped in profound silence, with even the production staff forgetting the cameras still broadcast every passing second to millions of viewers around the world. What had begun as a live podcast had become an unforgettable lesson about the unbearable cost of silence and the fragile nature of trust when people choose to suffer alone. Yet despite everything Jimin had finally revealed, one mystery still lingered. The folded page lying at his side contained words he had never spoken aloud, words he had almost read before choosing to speak from his heart instead. As a faint breeze from the studio ventilation loosened the paper from his hand, it drifted gently onto the floor near Jungkook's feet, exposing a single handwritten sentence that immediately drained the color from Jungkook's face and signaled that the most heartbreaking truth was only now beginning to unfold. Jungkook's eyes remained fixed on the handwritten sentence, as though the world around him had dissolved into silence. He bent down almost instinctively, his hands trembling as he lifted the page from the floor with a care that reflected its unimaginable importance. The paper was worn along the folds, evidence that it had been opened and rewritten countless times before this day ever arrived. Every crease carried the weight of hesitation, every faint mark a reminder of nights spent wrestling with emotions too overwhelming to express. Although the full contents remained hidden from the audience, the single visible line was enough to shake Jungkook to his core. It revealed that Jimin had once been prepared to disappear from Jungkook's life completely if that was the only way to protect the future they had both worked so hard to build. The realization struck with devastating force. Everything Jungkook had interpreted as distance, uncertainty, or fading affection had actually been the opposite. Every painful step backward had been an act of self-denial born from unwavering loyalty. The guilt that had quietly haunted him for weeks now transformed into something far deeper, a heartbreaking awareness that the person he trusted most had carried unimaginable loneliness without allowing anyone to share its weight. Around them, RM closed his eyes as the meaning of Jimin's sacrifice finally became clear. Jin's expression reflected both sorrow and admiration. Sugar silently acknowledged the courage it had taken to endure such isolation. J-Hope struggled to hold onto hope through the overwhelming emotion filling the room, and Taehyung realized that the confession had become far greater than anyone could have anticipated. Millions watching the broadcast could feel the sincerity in every passing second, sensing that they were witnessing a moment defined not by spectacle but by profound human vulnerability. Jimin looked at Jungkook with quiet acceptance, no longer trying to defend his choices or lessen their impact. He understood that some truths could never be softened. They simply had to be faced together. As Jungkook carefully unfolded the remaining pages, his breathing grew unsteady. There were still words Jimin had been unable to speak aloud, words written long before this broadcast ever existed. And as Jungkook prepared to read them for the first time, the fragile silence that had settled over the studio carried the unmistakable feeling that the final barrier between two hearts was about to disappear forever. Jungkook carefully unfolded the remaining pages, his eyes moving slowly across each handwritten line as though every sentence carried the weight of an entire lifetime. The studio remained completely silent, respecting a moment that no script could have anticipated. Although the audience could not see the words themselves, the gradual change in Jungkook's expression revealed more than any camera ever could. Confusion gave way to disbelief, disbelief to overwhelming sorrow, and sorrow to a profound understanding that left him struggling to steady his breathing. Each paragraph described memories he had shared with Jimin from a perspective he had never imagined, revealing countless moments when Jimin had quietly chosen to carry disappointment, loneliness, and blame so that Jungkook could continue moving forward without the burden of guilt. There was no resentment written between those lines, no attempt to seek recognition or sympathy. Instead, every word reflected gratitude for the years they had spent together and an unwavering hope that, even if they drifted apart, Jungkook would never question his own worth because of choices Jimin had made alone. That realization shattered the final illusion Jungkook had been holding on to. He finally understood that the greatest misunderstanding between them had not been caused by betrayal or fading trust, but by two people trying to protect each other in completely opposite ways. Jimin believed love meant carrying every burden in silence, while Jungkook believed trust meant respecting the silence of someone he cared about. Those opposing acts of devotion had unintentionally built walls where neither of them had ever intended to create distance. RM quietly reflected on how easily even the strongest relationships could be tested when fear replaced honest vulnerability. Jin recognized that true courage was not found in enduring pain alone, but in allowing others to stand beside you through it. Sugar saw in the unfolding moment a reminder that silence, no matter how compassionate its intention, could slowly become its own form of heartbreak. J-Hope felt hope returning for the first time since the broadcast began, sensing that honesty was finally breaking through months of emotional isolation, while Taehyung watched with quiet relief as years of unspoken feelings gave way to genuine understanding. Yet before the weight of those written words could fully settle, Jungkook reached the final page. Unlike the others, it contained only a few carefully written lines and a date that immediately caught his attention. It was a date from long before the distance between them had ever begun, proving that Jimin's silent sacrifice had started much earlier than anyone had realized, and the meaning behind that forgotten day was about to reveal the deepest truth of all. Jungkook stared at the date for what felt like an eternity, searching his memory until the forgotten day slowly emerged from the shadows of the past. It had been a day everyone else remembered as a celebration, filled with smiles, achievements, and hopeful plans for the future. To Jungkook, it had always represented one of the happiest milestones of his life. He had never imagined that while he was embracing that joyful moment, Jimin had been quietly making a life-altering decision that would remain hidden for years. The realization sent a wave of emotion through him so powerful that every memory connected to that day began transforming before his eyes. What had once appeared effortless now revealed invisible acts of sacrifice woven into every detail. Jimin had celebrated with genuine happiness, encouraged everyone with unwavering warmth, and never allowed even the smallest hint of his inner struggle to surface. Behind every smile had been a silent promise to protect Jungkook from a burden he believed no one else should carry. The pages explained that from that very day forward, Jimin had chosen to become the guardian of a truth that could have changed the course of their lives, convincing himself that enduring loneliness was a small price to pay if it meant preserving Jungkook's hope and confidence. He never expected gratitude, recognition, or forgiveness. He only wished that one day, if the truth could no longer remain hidden, Jungkook would understand that every painful decision had been rooted in love rather than fear. As those words settled into Jungkook's heart, tears filled his eyes, not from anger over what had been concealed, but from the unbearable thought of how long Jimin had carried such overwhelming emotional weight without allowing anyone to stand beside him. Around them, the atmosphere inside the studio shifted once again. The tension that had dominated every moment of the broadcast slowly gave way to something quieter and far more powerful. It was the fragile beginning of understanding. Jin, Sugar, J-Hope, and Taehyung exchanged silent glances, recognizing that the truth had finally broken through years of misunderstanding. Yet even now, one question remained unanswered. Why had Jimin chosen this exact day, this live broadcast, and this public stage to reveal everything instead of sharing it privately long before? The answer to that final question rested not in the pages Jungkook had just finished reading, but in the final decision Jimin had made only hours before stepping onto the stage, a decision that would determine whether this confession became the end of their story or the beginning of an entirely new chapter.